All right, here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. Welcome to you, whoever you are, whether you're new or you're returning. Whose ever ear is being met by the sound of my voice in this moment. I appreciate you listening. And I do mean listening. I was just thinking about the show, and recently I recorded a few talks where my guest preferred to have the video on. And one of these guests, at least, is kind of a big name person, like a best-selling author. And, you know, it might make sense to use that video to post it on YouTube, right? The theory would be that it would maybe attract people that don't normally listen to my show and might increase listenership. Because I'm certainly not going to make any money off YouTube. And I don't think I'm doing it. I don't think I want this show to be in video form. Even if it is on YouTube, I'd want it to stay just as an audio, I think. Because I feel like it's more intimate, or it asks something of us that's different. And I will admit, I do both. I listen to podcasts just as audio, and there are a few that I will watch as video. But those tend to be ones where they're in a studio and they're in the same room together, not like a Zoom meeting. Although I've watched recorded Zooms too. But for me, there's something really different about having it be audio. I mean, you of course have to be on some kind of device to be listening to this, but I don't know, maybe it's just sentimental. Like when I was growing up, we had mixtapes, it was before digital stuff. So we had cassette recorders, and I would record songs for friends, and there would be a little mic attached to that boombox, and you could talk into it and leave little messages for your friends and give them a mixtape. And then they would listen to it. I don't know. You know what it is? I'm really feeling a pang of what things were like not that long ago, only a few years ago now. It seems crazy. And I've said recently that I really want to get back out there a little bit and do some in-person events. And there were a few of you, just like 2 or 3 people, who did reach out about coming to hang out. And if that's you, if you're listening right now, I'm definitely going to get back to you. I haven't done it yet. I have had one person coming to one of my classes here in the neighborhood regularly now for like more than a month. Like I got a regular, one regular student for one of my 3 classes. And there's something there, and I feel a need to kick myself in the butt about it, or to just make myself have to do it, because everything seems to be pushing in another direction, and it feels like important to orchestrate in-person human interaction. And also, I guess I've been thinking about this a lot with my kids, but that's a longer story. Maybe I'll say something about that on the other side. Seeing the world through my kids' eyes has been really making me want to try to see if I can find ways to incentivize engaging with technology in a different way, or thinking about the engagement of technology in a new way, and prioritizing calling somebody on the phone and talking to them, or going out and seeing them and going to have a cup of tea, or just getting together in ways beyond Zoom meetings, as well as being careful about what I am using Zoom meetings for and what I'm not using them for. So all of this has been on my mind, and I guess I'm really curious how many of you out there right now listening to this are going to yoga classes right now in person? How many people are going to the centers? And I guess we should qualify that by how many of you who were going to in-person yoga classes 4 years ago, before the world fell apart, are going back to them again, have returned? And are you going as often as you were? how many of us have switched over entirely to online stuff? I just yesterday, I said to my wife, I was sitting there with my laptop and I closed it and I just had this look on my face and she said, what's up? And I said, I don't know. I'm struck by the fact that everything I'm doing, all the way I'm making a living for us is through this laptop, just me and this laptop. It was never that way. Even 5 years ago, there was still more than 50% of what I was doing and the money I was making from it came from me being in actual spaces with people. And here we are 5 years later and it's 100% online essentially. And I'm freaked out by that. And I'm interested to know if there is a grassroots in-person yoga scene out there. And if there is, I want to find ways to support it and find out how it's working. And if people are having success stories, I want W's. Remember that? I want W's. I want wins. Anybody out there who's got a yoga center that's thriving right now? I would like to hear about that. And it just so happens that today I'm talking with Genny Wilkinson, and she's opening a new place in the UK. And she is someone who knows all about the management of yoga centers. And she's someone who I know personally, having worked with her over the years. I taught at triYoga where she managed for many years. She since left triYoga and is opening a new place called Mission. And it definitely has a mission to it. I think she has learned many lessons from the role that she's played over the years, and they're trying new things. So it was wonderful to reconnect with her after quite a few years and find out a little bit about what happened there at triYoga and what she's working on now. If I'm not mistaken, it's opening today, or at least this week on the day this is coming out. I'm not sure if it's not open today, it's opening within days of this posting. And I think that Genny has a lot of insights that speak to where we are and to what I was just talking about feeling this need to get back together again in person. So, very cool to touch base with Genny, and I'm happy to be sharing it with you today. Real quick before we get to it, I do want to express gratitude to our podcast premium subscribers. And last week, I mentioned that the percentage of regular listeners to podcast premium subscribers was pretty low, and that if we could get even just a few people to support this show through a podcast premium subscription, it would make a big difference. And some of you took up that call. I really appreciate that. There was a small group of people who took up that call to action. And I want to thank you for doing that. And I want to reiterate it again because it actually got us a good way there, a quarter of the way, 1/4% just from last week's plea. So maybe a few more of you who have been listening to the show and appreciating what you're getting from the show and want to be someone who helps keep it going, as well as get access to the full archives, which is quite a resource. Perhaps some of you would also get on board and become a podcast premium subscriber. Today, I specifically want to say thank you to Anna Marie Webb and Cheryl Washington. Cheers to you both, Anna Marie and Cheryl. Both of them have been supporting us for some time now, and we appreciate it so much. If you want to learn more about how you can become a podcast premium subscriber, along with all of the other things that I do, I've got ongoing classes and group discussions that you can participate with online. I've got some on-demand stuff if you want to look into any of that. Everything that I'm offering can be found at jbrownyoga.com. All right, y'all. So I think that's good. I will touch base with you on the other side. But for now, let's go ahead and get to it. Let's listen to this conversation that I had with Genny Wilkinson. Hello?
Hey.
Hi, Genny.
How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
Yeah, stressed.
I hear you.
You've done it before. You know what this is like.
I know. Can we be starting right now? Or should we?
Sure.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, whatever you want to do. It's fine. I'm good.
Cool. Well, I'm glad to touch base with you. You know, let me, for anybody who listens to this, set up for me where we are for me, like in a conversation with you today, like what I bring to the table in a conversation.
Yeah.
I know you from you being the manager at triYoga.
Correct.
And, you know, I think back, you were on the show once before. I believe it was at the end of 2018.
That long ago?
We didn't really talk about triYoga or yoga centers. It was all about Ashtanga. We had a whole conversation about that.
Oh yes. No, yeah, no, I remember.
But that feels like another lifetime ago. Almost.
It was. I mean, the world has changed hugely since then. But yeah, it was a long time.
I also had Jonathan on at the beginning of 2019. And I always thought that was a very kind of significant conversation. And I was thinking back on it just now before I jumped on with you. Because I was thinking back to, you know, what triYoga was, or what I knew it was before the pandemic, I guess you would say. And I remember at the time I called it Indie Corp, which was not the right name for it. But the reason I called it that was because it was bigger. It had scale to it. It wasn't like a single room yoga center like I had. It had, I can't even remember, it was like 4 centers and like hundreds and hundreds of teachers. I remember Jonathan gave me the numbers and my jaw dropped to the floor. It's like how many teachers were on the staff and everything?
450.
450 teachers. My mind exploded. I had like 15 and I was like, that's crazy. So it was just big, you know?
Yeah.
And it was great. The facilities were the most ideal facilities a yoga teacher could ask for, in my view.
Yeah.
So in terms of just like the experience it provided and everything, it was great. And more importantly, it wasn't like YogaWorks, because I couldn't get into YogaWorks because I don't know the right people, had like a central office or something in terms of the programming. And with triYoga, you came to Brooklyn to my yoga center and took my class. You took me out to lunch afterwards. And it was very clear to me, like you were sizing me up. You were like, is this guy legit or not? And I loved it. I was like, that's awesome. So to me, like, even though triYoga was like big or bigger, it still had that because of our relationship, essentially. And then I think to like shortly before the pandemic hit, and I remember in New York City, the YogaWorks teachers had unionized. They had they'd like got themselves part of like a service workers union or something, and were organizing and to try to like have negotiating power against the people who ran YogaWorks International or whatever. And I remember feeling very skeptical of that. I was like, I don't really see what you guys are going to get, because I had a sense of what the business model was and how it was running, you know?
Yeah, you were uniquely positioned in that sense that you are a teacher, you were a studio owner, you knew both sides of the coin, which most people don't. Most people do not know both sides of the coin.
No, and then in that regard, I remember in the UK, there was a couple of blog posts kind of calling for, you know, better conditions for yoga teachers, better pay for yoga teachers, calling out triYoga specifically for not paying their teachers enough. And I remember being very skeptical of that, like very sympathetic. I want yoga teachers to get paid better, but I knew what they were asking didn't really make sense in terms of like how a place survives.
Yeah.
So it was always a bit of a conundrum for me, you know, like the place that had more scale, like triYoga, was able to offer infinite more possibilities and opportunities and resources for yoga teachers. But there were trade-offs to that. At the same time, taken to like its more extreme, like in terms of a place like Yoga Works or other places that are run in certain ways, it loses its soul, you know? Mm. So there's sort of like a balance there. And so now here we are, like I said, another lifetime away, and a lot's happened. You're not a triYoga anymore. I don't know. Can we talk about that at all? Like, I don't know how comfortable you feel to talk about it, and I don't want to stay focused on the past. I am interested in like what's happening now and the future.
I'll talk about anything.
Because I'm curious. I'm curious to hear if you're willing or able to share. I don't want you to get in any trouble, but maybe you want to get in trouble. What I would say is I'm curious, you know, what was happening at triYoga and why did you part ways from it? You were more invested in that place than anybody, it seemed to me.
Yeah. I mean, fair question. Look, lockdown was hard for everybody, right? Nobody escaped from the difficulties of that time. And that I would put myself firmly within that. You know, I had 4 kids at home who were homeschooling. That was fun. I was trying to help pivot the business at triYoga because, you know, like every yoga studio, overnight, we went from in-person classes to becoming, in effect, a tech company. And, you know, it was hard work and it kind of took its toll. I also saw some things that I wanted to change that I didn't necessarily have the power to change because, you know, it wasn't my company. I had a voice, but I just felt like I needed to do things a little bit differently, that it didn't make me right or wrong. It was just ideals that I held on to, that I felt it was time in my life that I needed to actually fulfill those. And, you know, I'm really forever grateful to Jonathan Satin, who's at the time, the managing director at triYoga, because he did give me a chance in that job when nobody else would have, right? Like I had 4 kids. I didn't know how I was going to get back into work. And I used to be a journalist. I couldn't get back into that lifestyle. And, you know, he did what most people wouldn't have done, which was to give a working mom in her 40s a job, right? And trusting me. So, you know, and I learned an awful lot from him. And there just comes a time, I think, you know, where everybody, it's just like being a student and a teacher. There comes a time where you kind of outgrow your teacher. And I feel, you know, a teacher's responsibility is to say, you know what, there's no more I can teach you. It's time for you to fly. Right. And I felt like I was in that position, and I had conversations with Jonathan, and he understood that I was, you know, a little bit burned out from everything that had gone on during lockdown, personally and professionally. And I took some time off. And during that time off, I was just thinking about what I was going to do. Do I go back into yoga? Do I go back to journalism? And it seemed like I had all these contacts in yoga and all of these lessons that I had learned, that it almost seemed like a waste for me to go back into journalism. I just thought I should stay here. I know these people. They're my friends. And I want to help them, really, because yoga teachers have suffered enormously over the past few years.
Well, and I know you are a practitioner, like a daily practitioner yourself. So it means something to you on that personal level, I think. I guess I'm curious, did you part ways before Jonathan sold the place or after? No,
before. I kind of saw the writing on the wall. I'm not a soothsayer, but, you know, so many places in London were closing down. And there were reasons for it that didn't actually have anything to do with mismanagement and everything to do with the buildup of debt that came coming out of COVID. Everybody's rent was suspended. And when it was time for people to come back into the studios and the landlords were lifting that moratorium, you were completely reliant on getting back those same numbers that you once had, which did not happen. Moreover, the landlords wanted to cut deals to make back some of their rent. You know, of course they were taking a haircut. They weren't asking for 100% of a year's worth of rent that was backed up, but they certainly needed some portion of it back. And that's why a lot of studios had to close down, because they just couldn't make ends meet. It was just simple balance sheet that wasn't allowing them to continue to exist.
The numbers weren't that great before the pandemic.
In the best of days, they're not that great. They're not. So I just felt, I could see that things were changing, and I felt bad because I felt a certain debt of gratitude to Jonathan and to the teachers there. But I had to kind of do something for myself, I suppose. It was time.
I hear you. I know what it's like when I had the center and I knew I wasn't going to renew the lease. And it's just like, how do I do right by everybody?
Yeah.
As well, what can I do to do right by? And some people were still not happy with me, despite every effort I could make to be totally transparent and like try to do everything I could to even get a new owner in there that I thought might keep everybody's job and stuff. It didn't work out. That person didn't last a year. I was there for 10 years, and the person who came in didn't last a year because they didn't listen to anything I had to say. I sympathize with you feeling like, as somebody who really knows what the process is for teachers and in terms of just making those things happen, like a class that builds a group that sustains over time, or like an event that draws people and that everybody gets something out of, like to make that happen on a consistent basis over time. It's not just like an HR person's, it's like somebody has to have soul in it, because the teachers have soul in it, and it's all about relationships. As you said, it's all about relationships.
100%. It's all about relationships. So I did leave before things got really bad and they had to take outside investment that, in hindsight, it depends who you ask, right? But maybe it didn't turn out quite the way that people thought it would. Because triYoga was taken over by a fitness company. And there's a different ethos. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying it's just not the ethos of a yoga company. And what I have learned really clearly is that teachers and students want to belong to a place that is run by yoga people. It's really important to them. And triYoga is no longer run by yoga people. So there's a different ethos. They're now putting bar into, taking yoga out and replacing with bar. And that's a business decision that I am not in a position to criticize. That's the decision that they've made. They own that company now. So, they're going to do how they see fit to survive.
I totally think that's true. And I think my own personal perspective has evolved, because in the past, not too long ago, only a few years ago, I think I was really like, the studio model, it's broken and dead, and there's no way, because you have to meet these rents. And so all these decisions, like you say, that you have to make to try to make enough revenue to meet those overheads seems to at some point sacrifice the yoga. Now, having said that, I know, having let go of a center in 2017, traveled all around, met you. Now I have basically this space that I'm in now, which I pay very little money for each month, but it's a share with a photographer. We share it. We have days. And I've come to see the importance of dedicated space, like a space that's only for that thing. Because I can do a bunch of stuff at home, and I do stuff at home, but it's a challenge and it's not the same. So having like a dedicated space that's just for yoga, that only is about that, and that all the things that happen in there are on that frequency or whatever, if people like to think of it that way, it is a palpable thing. As somebody who's taught in a lot of different rooms and is in favor of yoga teachers teaching it, the county halls or whatever in their living rooms, I'm in favor of all that grassroots build up, because that's actually what's working for people more right now, because the center landscape is kind of a wasteland. I mean, I don't really know. It's hard to know what's going on out there, because everything seems very, I don't know. Since you left triYoga, I know, like you said, things haven't gone so great there. It's hard to know, because again, the way things get run, like you said, the ethos of the way a place gets run is different depending on that management. But I know that you've been at work on something, a new place. So what's the story with that, and how does that happen?
So that happened. The genesis of it is actually quite a long time ago, probably about 8 years ago. I have 4 kids, as you know, and my youngest one, his best mate from reception, so that's kindergarten in the U.S. I knew his as all the parents of the school, and the father.
You get to know the other parents because you got to.
The dad found out that I worked at triYoga, and he was a practitioner. He actually started off in Mysore, then he moved to rocket classes, and he was super interested in yoga studios and how they work. And we would have conversations from time to time. And then, round about the time that I left, he kind of said, do you want to open something? And I was like, you're out of your mind. Not doing it again. Yes,
because at that point you knew how they ran fully. It wasn't just an idea. And you're like, forget it.
But that's what I started to think about what I'm going to do. And he and I would have so many conversations about things that we thought could be done better. Mm. And he was coming with such a fresh perspective that was not, influenced by yoga only world. He's a graduate of Oxford. He's got a mathematics degree, and he's like the finance guy. He knows how to start up businesses and how to run them. And we just started talking about what it would look like if we had a clean slate. Right. And we did have a clean slate. And then the conversation, I was looking for reasons not to do it, Jay. And I could
understand that. I could understand that.
I actually couldn't find one. So the next thing I knew, we were looking at spaces. And there was this one space that we walked into. It wasn't very far into the search, maybe like the 4th building that we went to. And how you walk into a place, you just know that it's perfect.
This is it. This is it.
You just know. And I was like, now I really can't not do this. Mm. Because this building is made for it. I mean, actually, the building is not made for anything because at the time it was completely derelict. Mm. It was in such a poor state, which is why we were able to negotiate, a fairly decent rate on a space that big. It was 15,000. It is 15,000 square feet. It's enormous.
Oh, that's huge.
But we were able to secure it. It wasn't easy. It probably took about 6 months of haggling with the landlord. He's this 80-year-old Turkish man. He's very wily, very smart. Wouldn't let us get away with anything.
Yeah.
But I like Jack. I like that kind of quirky person as a landlord. It's not an institution. That's one of the things that nothing about this project has institution written behind it. This is all people.
Interesting. And I'm just, I'm assuming that this gentleman has some funds that he can put into it. And that's the thing, because you got to have that's the thing that yoga teachers never have. They never have either the smarts, but the money to start the thing.
Yeah. No, Simon had the capital, but, it's also, there's some sort of some financing that's happened along the way. So I think it's backed in a very intelligent way, in the sense that the financial model has been poured through ad nauseum. I can't quite explain to you how every little bit is looked at. And so it should be, right?
I mean, that's the thing, though. It's interesting you say that, because I didn't do that. Most of the people I know, small people, didn't do that. They just, it was a hope and a prayer, and it worked for as long as it worked. And I always wished that I had started those spreadsheets earlier on, Yeah.
Well, that's what's great actually about this partnership, is that I know the yoga, right? And Simon knows how to start and run a business over the long term. Mm. And, I think that yoga people, and I am a yoga person, that's where we are weak, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes businesses are started without actually really considering what are your costs. And it's not just rent. It's not just employees. It's things like music licensing, insurance, laundry, the cleaners who are going to come in every day. What about how much you have to pay to have the bins collected 3 times a week? There's so much that you have to take into consideration, that when you're building your model to see how it actually works, you're mad if you don't know what's coming. You have to know clearly what's in front of you.
I mean, I've said this many times on the show before, but it bears repeating that I would not be in the position I'm in if it wasn't for my friend and business partner, Josh Citron. I always have to shout him out because, like you say, I just don't, even to this day, even though I've really educated myself and now I really am on it in a way that I wasn't in the past, still my mind just doesn't work that way. Like I don't want it to either. Like I want to be in the yoga, like, so the idea is having someone whose mind does work like that and appreciates what I'm doing has been essential because he sees things I don't see and saves me from shooting myself in the foot again and again. Because you have to, like you say, have that kind of foresight, and that is the business side of it. We talk about what's the business side, but that alone doesn't work without the other thing, because we've seen that in the other models, like the large chain models.
Yeah.
So it's kind of striking that sthira sukha of it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, exactly that.
Yeah. So, all right. So you've been building out a place for how long have you been doing that? How long has it taken? I mean, are you close to opening? Where are you?
Close. We're close. It's taken a long time. There's been, a litany of issues. And the problem with falling in love with a building is that you kind of like, oh, I'm so in love with you, and I'm not going to pay attention to the fact that you don't have adequate electricity supply. So things like that. We've had to tap into a local substation to up our electricity supply. Like those are like the one of the several big matters.
And the costs of that are fluctuating grossly.
Yeah, we also had to apply for permission from the local council to do the upgrades to the building because its backyard is next to a grade 1 listed church. Now, for anybody who's, your viewers and listeners in the US, that basically means it's a building you can't touch. Now, we weren't touching the church. It's an 18th century church that was designed by Nicholas Hawksmoor, who's quite famous here in the UK. He's like Sir Christopher Wren, who did St. Paul's. But if at any point you were standing in a place where you can see the church and you can also see our building, they don't like it. So anything that I did to our building, we had to get council approval from. So it would have been like the windows to the new doors to plant on the roof. Can it be seen anywhere near the church? And that took 10 months for us to get planning from the council because they move at a snail's pace, right? So
I mean, if anything, you're probably making it much nicer to look at out the window.
Exactly. And employing people, right? But they don't quite think of it that way, right? We also have what's very different about Mission, is the name of the studio, is that we have a fully serviced restaurant on the top floor and a terrace that overlooks the city as well as that church. And we will be serving, alcohol. Don't get me wrong. This is not a club. Like but if somebody wants to come up,
it's upstairs, right? It's not in the yoga center, right?
No. It's on the top floor. So if you want to come up for, a meal and have a glass of wine, that's there for you. And I think that you would never find that in a yoga studio, or at least here you wouldn't, because people are like, oh, well, you shouldn't be drinking after practice. Well, I practice very early in the morning, so I'm not going to be drinking at 9 o'clock in the morning. But I just think that, one of the things that Mission was founded on was to stop telling people what to do. Do you know what I mean? Like, people can make their own choices in life. If you choose to abstain from alcohol, amazing. Come upstairs and hang out. I'm going to give you a great non-alcoholic cocktail. If you would like to have a gin and tonic because it's Sunday night and you just want to sit and watch the sunset over the city skyline, you can do that too. Do you know what I mean? Like, I just feel like yoga got to a place where it was so dogmatic and what people should look like, how they should move, what they should eat, what they should drink, what they should read. And all these shoulds had the effect of making a lot of people think, do you know what? That's not me. I don't feel welcome in that world.
I think you're right about that. I will say I know somebody who opened a bar / yoga center in Brooklyn. Like they had a space that they had a bar in the front and then they had a back room that they were doing yoga classes out of. And it was very controversial. I remember people writing about it and being upset. And in general, I don't have any problem with it. I mean, I'm kind of with you on what you just said in terms of non-dogmatic presentations of yoga. But I will say that the criticism I heard that I think is a valid criticism is that, you know, if you're like a recovering alcoholic and you have to walk through a bar to get to your yoga class, you're probably maybe not going to want to do that.
Totally.
But having a restaurant upstairs in the same building, I mean, Jiva Mukti Yoga Center that I started on was on the second floor, right on top of a Thai restaurant. We all used to go down there and get margaritas or whatever.
Yeah.
I agree in terms of like some kind of purity, but I also, referencing back to our early comments in this conversation, like if having that restaurant on the upper floor is going to make it possible for there to be a really great yoga center in the same building, I just don't see how anybody can make a really credible case against that.
I guess what we were trying to do is create a place for people to hang out with their teacher after class. Because what I noticed at triYoga was that teachers would go out with their students afterwards, but they'd have to leave the building. You know?
Well, they did have that kind of space and that little cafe, and that was kind of great. But I know what you mean. Like you did,
it's bigger.
There's only so much you could do in that little space.
Yeah, this is a proper, fully serviced restaurant with a guy who this is his second restaurant. He knows what he's doing, and there's also like going to be sofas to hang out in. If you wanted to come up there at like 10 in the morning to do a little bit of work with a coffee, and then go to your lunchtime class, like we're trying to create a place where people can hang out. I sometimes call it like a cathedral of social interaction, because it's a hangover from when we couldn't see each other or touch each other or talk to each other for such a long period of time. And, you know, yoga was so dependent on those communities. That's why I loved it. You know, that's why I love my shala where I go to, because I don't necessarily go there for adjustments. I go there to see my teacher. I go there to see my friends. It's
for the bhav, the feeling in the room. That's what I meant about dedicated space. There's a bhav to the place.
Yeah, it's 18 years that place has been my home, and then everybody got ripped out of their homes, and then there came a time when people were coming back and everything was shutting down, and I was like, we need to build a place that's like truly going to give a place for people to hang out and be together.
I get that. I'm with you. I'm having this really deep need to get back in the room with people. And I have started to get some people to come from my local neighborhood, and it's felt so good. But like you say, to have, when I had the center, that was the best part of it. Like I just had a space where we could hang out. And that's where a lot of the yoga happened.
Yeah.
That's where the yoga, all the things outside of just doing the breathing and moving happened there.
Yeah.
All right. So I guess my other curiosities now is, you mentioned that there were things that you wanted to do when you were triYoga. You know, like you said, this was like my view. This is what maybe that's just not how they wanted to do it. And I respect that. And then now you've got this opportunity where somebody's like, okay, it's that kind of almost fantasy situation where someone says, okay, I'll bankroll you. What would you do? And you're like, okay, now you have to actually put up or shut up, I guess. Yeah. So I guess, what are the things that you think need to be done different?
Sure. So we did already discuss one with that restaurant. I went to cooking school, so I'm like a failed, frustrated chef. And I wanted to have something like really cool and really fun on top of the yoga center for people to go hang out after. So that was the one thing. There's a lot of things. So we are not just offering yoga. We are also offering other movement practices. Now, we've been pretty careful about which movement practices we're working with, because we are not a gym. I think it's important to mention that.
So there's no yoga, like weight training, or there might be strength training kind of classes.
There you
Sorry.
go. So we have rooms that are dedicated to yoga, right? Because I'm very clear that we are not blending practices. And I want your listeners to understand that before I get shot. We are not blending practices. Yoga is happening in studios 1, 2, and 4, and 5. What's happening in studio 3 is the movement practices. The reason why we did this was because over the years, I found out that a lot of teachers drink alcohol and eat meat, and they also do other practices they never tell anybody about, right? Because
they're telling people are talking about it more and more. You'd be surprised.
Well, now they are, right? But for years, I actually drank that Kool-Aid. I was like, 6 days a week. This is my practice. Nothing else, because this is the only thing that is good for me, right? This is just ridiculous because it's not true. And I was starting to get, injuries and I wasn't, doing things that were really more balanced for my body. And then I started to talk to all these yoga teachers and they're like, yeah, I go to mobility classes. I go to strength classes. We just don't tell anybody that we do it. So now it's like, let's just pull this out in the open because it's happening. And I, for one, am tired of people pretending that it's not. So we have calisthenics classes, which are pull-ups, dips, sometimes, weight assisted squats. So really building on strength and mobility. And there's probably about 35 classes on the schedule of the week that are for calisthenics that are taught by a calisthenics team that are amazing at what they do. They're super inspiring. We will also have capoeira-based practices with this teacher, Barish. He's amazing. He's also a yoga teacher, but he's got his background is mostly in capoeira, and he's just so cool to watch him move, right?
Capoeira is awesome. I want to learn capoeira.
Yeah. It's so fluid. It's like, how in Ashtanga, we're so linear and like robots. And when I look at the capoeira students, they're just so loose and limber and fluid. And it's beautiful to watch. It really is.
Yeah.
We will also have handstand classes in that movement space taught by this guy named Sammy Deneen, who actually teaches at the circus. And he's also a performer. And, handstands have hugely grown in popularity in yoga classes. But what tends to happen in a yoga class is you just kind of bang up into it, in like Surya Namaskar A, but there's not really any instruction. So with the handstand classes, Sammy is an expert in this, and he's going to break it down for people. So whether you're, a beginner who's never done it before, or you're starting to advance and you're doing straddle presses or pikes, or, even one arm, it's pretty, the level of attention to detail that he puts on it is super interesting. And again, it's like taking it, it's not in the yoga context, right? It's like helping
you would have like handstand workshops or whatever, where you just focus on handstands. But I appreciate that because I've always maintained that if the goal is handstand, you're probably better learning it from somebody who's not a yoga teacher. If the goal is utilizing a handstand for some other kind of purpose that has to do with yoga, then I think you might want a yoga teacher for that. But
yeah. So that room is markedly different. And one of the reasons of, so what it is that we wanted to do different, that was one. The other is pricing structure. Now, this is super sensitive, and you can't talk about pricing structure if you don't talk about the other side of the coin, which is teacher pay.
Exactly.
Right? They are linked inextricably.
Good point.
So we were very clear, Simon and I, that we wanted to pay our teachers the best in London, right? So how were we going to do that without passing it on to the students in such a way that closed people off, right? Because if
you also want to have as wide a net, you want to be able to bring in as many people as you can.
There's a lot of talk in yoga world about yoga is for everyone. Well, it's not if you can't afford a 20-pound, 25-pound drop-in, actually.
Yeah, I know. And you can say that that's not right, and that there would hopefully be opportunities for people who don't have money to go to yoga. But the reality is, if you want to have a yoga center like we're talking about, it's going to have to be for people who have money to pay for that. Otherwise, it doesn't exist.
Yeah. So how did we get around that? We thought about it a lot, and it wasn't easy, right? And I have to say that before I describe it, it is a bit of an experiment because I have to rely on people's honesty to participate in this program to keep it going. So we have 3 tiers. The top tier covers the true cost of our services, which is the rent, the operations, the teacher pay, everything, right? So what those people who have jobs, those people who afford both their wants and their needs, people who might own a house or comfortably pay their rent, they would pay that tier, which is the true cost of our services. Okay. The tier below that is for people who just might struggle to make that meet. Maybe if it's going to impede on their ability to pay for childcare or their rent or something that is critical to their daily lives, then they would pay that middle rate. And that middle rate is called the Sen rate, which is named after a Bangladeshi woman in the neighborhood. The bottom rate is called for the Wesker pass holders. Wesker was a suffragette in the local area. And that's for the people who really can't afford to get in even at that middle rate, right? They may be their carers, or they work in the NHS, or they're underemployed. They would go into that tier, which is, the lowest that you can possibly pay in London. With all that said, we also recognize that for some people... Wait,
let me ask you a question about that. So did I hear that correctly, that the amount someone pays for access to the place or yoga classes, I don't know which we're talking about yet, is based on their life situation? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Wow.
And they decide.
And they have to just be honest.
I can't,
because everybody could come in and tell you whatever they want to tell you.
They could.
Wow.
I'm not going to sit there and say, prove it to me.
Yeah, you're not going to make them show your tax returns or something.
No, because who wants to be under that level of scrutiny? Yeah. Nobody, right? But it's about communication, and it's about if you can afford this, not only are you paying for what it actually costs, but you are also subsidizing the people who can't come in at those rates.
That's really interesting. I mean, it's very yogic. You're asking people to be on their honor.
I am. I had a corporate pitch today with bank, and I said to them, I got to be honest with you, it doesn't make any sense to me why corporate rates are at a cheaper rate than the normal rate. Obviously, it's because you bring in the numbers, right? It's about quantity and mass. But why should somebody who works at a law firm or a bank or an accounting firm who's got, good, secure jobs, why are you paying less?
You're the ones who got the money.
but it's not, I don't want to shame those people either, but it's you're going to do something really good for yourself and you're going to do something really good for the community at a really tough time. So, come.
There's a sell. It's not just, but isn't that interesting? Because on a lot of levels, I often say what happens in the yoga world is an expression of tapping in our large. If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.